The word police has a long history and shares roots with the Greek word polis, meaning city, and the English word policy. As it has evolved through a host of Latin and French words that I can't pronounce, it has gained the connotations of regulation and civil administration. Even older than the word policing is the concept of policing. Even though strict separation of powers in government is a relatively new idea, the delegation of strictly executive power to a policing body is not new. Since ancient times, police have been delegated power to enforce laws, but not to make them. Some civilizations relied on the military for policing, while others had policing bodies apart from the military. Some, such as Athens, even used slaves for more common tasks, such as crowd control. The common threads of policing in ancient civilizations are investigation of petty crimes, keeping the peace, including crowd control, power to arrest, and state-legitimized violence for purposes of law enforcement. As in ancient times, there is some variation between countries as to whether the military is involved in policing, such as the French Gendarmerie Nationale and similar bodies in the Netherlands, Spain, and Portugal, or whether the agency is a completely separate body than the military. Additionally, there is a good variation between countries as to the level of centralization of the police force. For example, South Africa and Israel forces are organized at a national level, while Mexico, Canada, Argentina, and Australia have a layered or local police force in addition to the national system. With a few notable exceptions, police officers in most countries carry handguns as a primary weapon, and they have access to heavier weaponry when needed. Most police officers also carry tasers, pepper spray, and other non-lethal weapons that can be used in their law enforcement duties. In this episode of Just the Facts, we will focus exclusively on police violence. I will not include in this analysis any breakdown by race, nor will I address the concept of defund the police. I intend to do separate follow-up videos for each of those topics and keep this video just focused on police violence, because that by itself is a category broad enough to merit one video without muddying the waters. The United States has a tiered system of police. There are 800,000 police officers in the US and 18,000 police agencies. While there are federal police agencies such as the immigration officers, the majority of police agencies in the US are local and are regulated primarily by state law. The legitimacy of the use of force by police officers has a very extensive legal tradition, but the principles that govern the use of force stem primarily from two controversial Supreme Court cases, Tennessee v. Garner and Graham v. Conner. Both decisions evaluate the use of deadly force through a paradigm of the Fourth Amendment, or the right to unreasonable search and seizure, rather than under the standard of due process. And Graham v. Conner in particular has been cited 20,000 times in various legal contexts. The first case, Tennessee v. Garner. A Tennessee police officer shot and killed a 15-year-old boy who was fleeing from the police after committing a burglary. After an extensive legal battle, the Supreme Court ruled that under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, a police officer may use deadly force to prevent the escape of a fleeing suspect, only if the officer has a good faith belief that the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. Following that case, Graham v. Conner expands and concludes that the Fourth Amendment reasonableness inquiry is whether the officer's actions are objectively reasonable, in light of the facts and circumstances confronting them, without regard to the underlying intent or motivation. The reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, and its calculus must embody an allowance for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second decisions about the amount of force necessary in a particular situation. These two Supreme Court decisions form the basis of current American legal doctrine concerning the use of deadly force in the line of policing. The one-sentence version is that, from a constitutional perspective, the use of deadly force is justified if an officer can reasonably conclude that the suspect is a threat, given only the facts that the officer is aware of at the time of the shooting. Because the standard of objective reasonableness is quite broad, the lion's share of regulating and training police behavior falls to states and individual agencies. There is a dearth of reliable, complete, and official data regarding police shootings, but civilian efforts have largely picked up the slack. In 2015, there were 1,134 deaths at the hands of police officers, about 990 of which were the result of a firearm discharge. While only 27% of police officers have ever fired their weapon on the job, the rate of police shootings is significant enough that police use of force accounts for 0.05% of all male deaths in the United States, which is to say that about 1 in 2,000 men will be killed by police during their lifetime. It is significant to note that that number is an order of magnitude lower for women. It's so significant that death at the hands of a police officer is the 6th leading cause of death in young men between the ages of 25 and 29, and ranks just behind cancer. In delving into exactly why there were so many police shootings, a study examined the best data available for police shootings between 2009 and 2012 and found that 22% were mental health related, 18% of police shootings were suspected to be suicide by cop, and 14% of shootings involved domestic partner violence. While the concept of suicide by cop is tragic enough, the 22% related to mental health is even more tragic. In many of these cases, what this means is that someone calls the cops because they or someone around them is suffering a mental health incident, and the situation ends with someone getting shot. It is estimated that between a quarter and a half of all police shootings involve someone with a mental health condition. Similarly, the 14% of shootings resulting from domestic partner violence is generally not the hoped-for outcome when you have to call the cops because you and your partner are fighting. 80% of the time, a police shooting occurs after suspicion of a precipitating crime, and that crime is most often assault or homicide. However, 19% of the time, there is no suspected crime mentioned in the official report, and reports vary about what percent of police shootings involve an unarmed civilian. Some reports say 6%, some say 9%, and some say 11%. There's a lot of controversy about how to gauge whether a police officer was justified in shooting a suspect, but the only real reliable gauge of whether a shooting was justified under the law is the legal system. Between 2005 and 2020, only 42 cops, or an average of less than 3 a year, were convicted of a criminal offense due to shooting a suspect. This means that when put to the legal test of drawing up formal charges and holding a jury trial, the vast majority of cases are found to be justified under constitutional and state laws. The statistics of shootings wouldn't be complete without examining the number of cops killed annually. In 2018, 55 police officers were murdered, 51 with firearms, while another 51 were accidentally killed, mostly in motor vehicle accidents. These numbers are fairly typical of the last 20 years. And the level of police violence is so high in the US compared with other countries that a Canadian journalist made the disclaimer, "Everyone knows that the United States is a horror show," in an article calling for the reduction of violence by Canadian police. Among developed countries, the US has an incomparably high rate of police shootings per capita. Between 2017 and 2019, the US had 33.5 police shootings per 10 million inhabitants, while the next closest contender, Canada, only made it to 9.8, and Australia had 8.5. Rounding out the bottom of the charts were the UK with half of a shooting per 10 million, Japan with a fifth of a shooting per 10 million, and Iceland and Norway with a solid 0 shootings per 10 million inhabitants. The UK is the gold standard for police violence in the Anglophone world. In the last 20 years, only 25 cops have been murdered in the UK. Even when controlling for the differences in population, that is a staggering difference than the 55 cops murdered each year in the US. There are so few cops killed as a result of intervening to stop a crime in the UK that each officer killed has a separate line in a Wikipedia entry documenting each death. Similarly, the number of deaths at the hands of a cop in the UK is a single-digit number each year, with each being significant enough to merit a line in a Wikipedia entry. The phenomenon does not appear to be new, and the contrast between the rates of police violence in the US and the UK goes back at least 100 years. The UK seems to have found the secret to keeping violent deaths at the hands of police to a minimum. Which leads to the question, are there evidence-based solutions for driving down police violence in the US? Since the death of George Floyd earlier this year, there has been an immense amount of conjecture and speculation into ways to reduce the use of deadly force by police officers. The first thing that almost everyone agrees on is that more data is needed. In 2015, then Director of the FBI, James Comey, called the lack of data on the police use of force across the nation embarrassing and ridiculous. He noted that you can get accurate data on the number of people who saw The Martian with Matt Damon and the number of people who get the flu every year, but you can't get accurate, reliable, and official data on the police use of deadly force. One thing to note is that the widespread adoption of body cams by police officers has not reduced police violence by any significant measure, but it does provide better evidence and accountability. The Use of Force Project has done extensive research into how to reduce police violence, and it has found that one of the most effective methods is simply to have policies that restrict the use of force by police officers. They put forth an 8-point program consisting of the following principles. Number 1, require officers to de-escalate situations when possible before using force. 2, use a force continuum or matrix that define or limit the types of force and specific weapons that can be used to respond to specific levels of resistance. 3, restrict chokeholds and strangleholds, including carotid restraints, to situations where deadly force is authorized, or prohibit them altogether. Number 4, require officers to give a verbal warning when possible before using deadly force. Number 5, prohibit officers from shooting at people in moving vehicles, unless the person poses a deadly threat by means other than the vehicle. For example, people shooting from the vehicle. Number 6, require officers to exhaust all other reasonable alternatives before resorting to using deadly force. Number 7, require officers to intervene to stop another officer from using excessive force. Number 8, require officers to report both uses of force and threats or attempted uses of force. The Use of Force Project finds that agencies which employ 4 of these principles show 54% fewer killings, and agencies that implement all 8 show 72% fewer killings. They further find that officers in police departments with more restrictive policies in place are actually less likely to be killed in the line of duty, less likely to be assaulted, and have a similar likelihood of sustaining an injury during an assault. No other solution that I was able to find had such a dramatic effect on the reduction of police homicide as simply implementing more regulations surrounding the use of deadly force. Other ways to reduce police violence, such as greater community outreach through nonprofits focused on reducing crime, leveraging mental health professionals and counselors for 911 triage, demilitarization of the police, and additional de-escalation training, all of those either have mixed results or need further testing to determine the best practices for implementation. This list is by no means exhaustive, and if any of you have done research, I would love to see the data that you found on how police violence can be reduced in the US. Don't forget to post a comment. In a massive 2016 report compiled by the Police Executive Research Forum in conjunction with mental health professionals, scientists, and leaders in the policing community both nationally and internationally, the forum found and recommends 30 principles guiding the use of force. They say that the preservation of life has always been at the heart of American policing, and it is important to note that nearly all of the use of force incidents that have proved controversial, the officers should not be faulted because their actions reflected the training they received. What PERF calls for, and leading police chiefs call for in this report, are changes in policies, training, tactics, and equipment that provide officers with better tools for handling difficult situations. One of the great challenges to implementing these policies in the US is the immensely distributed nature of policing in the US. There are 12,000 local police agencies in the US and 18,000 when you lump in all the state and federal agencies. Apart from the standards set by the Supreme Court in the discussions that we had earlier, the laws surrounding the use of force are largely left to the states and the individual agencies. This makes large-scale change a Herculean task, but it also means that an individual can have a tremendous positive impact on their local community because the rules governing their local police are set so close to home. Hi, I hope you enjoyed that video. Now that you're in possession of the facts, just remember that having the facts doesn't make you right, and it doesn't make you better than the person that you're talking with. Always be respectful when you're discussing these difficult issues with the people around you. Also, I leave a date stamp in the title of each of these videos, so if I missed a fact or new facts come to light, please let me know in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. Just remember to keep it factual.